Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, where you come to each and every week for all the best in BC politics, and we're not going to disappoint you. This week we've got a lot on the plate, including what a wild week on a very kind of mundane topic here at the BC Legislature on freedom of information, with the Premier doing a bunch of weird stuff. We'll get into that. Bring in the panel first to get us all going, and remember, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Listen on Check Plus. You can get all the past episodes. If you missed last week's episode, you missed the week before that, you can go back and watch the show. Katy Merrifield, Vice President, Wellington Advocacy. Hello, Katy. Thank you for being here this week.
Hey, Rob. Glad to be here.
Maclean K, editor of the Orca. Hello, Maclean. Thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And Jillian Oliver, BC Green strategist extraordinaire. Hello, Jillian. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump into FOI, which I know, don't turn the show off. Some of you reaching for the nods. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's important. This is a week in which we had a big kerfuffle over freedom of information. Basically, there's a new bill in the House. It's going to charge people to apply for government records, potentially around $25. We're sort of waiting to see exactly what fee government lands on, but that's the one that the minister threw out there. Sparked a whole fury of backlash about transparency and accountability, about hypocrisy of a system that the NDP used in opposition and now are kneecapping in government, and a 7-page letter from the Privacy Commissioner raising all sorts of concerns. So let's go around the table and try to understand, A, does anyone care? B, does it matter? And C, how did government do on this? And maybe all of those are related or not related or aren't even mutually exclusive. Katy, what do you think?
I think people should care, first of all, because they're the ones who are going to pay for it. Like, the opposition filing FOI requests will likely take it from their caucus budget. That money comes from taxpayers, so it is relevant. And also putting a fee on transparency for a government that has, when they were in opposition, constantly attacked the government of the day. I think this is a very relevant matter. I want to talk about timing, because I think folks might wonder, why is this coming now? Strategically, it makes a lot of sense to get all of your unpopular policies out in the first year, or close to that, at least in the first half of your mandate. Horgan and the NDP still have a lot of political capital to expend, right? Angus came out recently with a survey confirming Horgan is still the third most popular premier in the country. The BC Liberals are in the midst of a leadership race, so they are occupied on other things. So is this legislation right? No. Does it make sense in terms of timing? Absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to start doing the things that people will forget about 3 years from now in the next election now. So, Jillian, what do you think?
I think that it is, on its own, it's not going to be like a game changer, but it does a couple things that could sort of, resonate through the rest of the NDP's term. One is that it ticks off the press, which is always, I think the BC Liberals raise that in the House is never a good idea. And it also kind of just goes to sort of like a narrative that the NDP is not being transparent, that they have something to hide. And it sort of creates a general sense of mistrust with the public when they hear that the government wants to make it harder for people, for the press to access information. So I think that it's sort of, on its own, it's not a huge deal, but it can add up to a narrative ahead of the next election for sure.
Yeah, it maybe feeds into, there's a couple lines that the Premier had this week, like, who cares? Literally stood in the House and said, who cares? And, that you could see that coming up in a couple seconds of an attack ad a few years from now, if you can put it in the right context kind of thing. Maclean, want to jump in?
Yeah, Katy and Jillian's points are both well taken. And I think that the biggest things to draw here first, the NDP seem to be almost taking on the media specifically with this bill, which is never a good idea, especially for a party that has enjoyed, I don't want to say a friendly relationship with the media, but they have gotten a fairly soft ride in the first 4 years. This will absolutely undermine that. And the way they handled it just let me more confused than anything else. These are bright, smart people who have dealt with releasing even uncomfortable news brilliantly in the past, quite frankly. And to do it this way, sending out a minister who doesn't quite admit what it is they're doing and then outright denying it, and then having the Premier say, as you say, get real, who cares, which is the kind of thing that you absolutely will see in attack releases and ads 3 years from now. And then a bizarre moment where he shows everyone his phone and ends with, and I don't know what else is on here, a lot of stuff that I don't understand. I guess it plays into the Premier dad image that Horgan has cultivated, but it also, anytime you're being memed is not a good thing. even when it's a kind of a friendly thing, it does sort of tend to undermine credibility. I don't think anyone in the Premier's office came out of yesterday's press conference thinking that went well.
Mm-hmm. And there seems to be two targets here with this fee, and one is the opposition Liberals, which the NDP feel are abusing the act because they're filing thousands of FOI requests on fishing expeditions, fishing trips, things like everyone's emails and all that sort of stuff. And then one particular journalist, Bob Maclean, who happens to have filed more FOIs in a single year than all of the BC media combined, and the government feels is abusing the process as well. I'll just open this up to anybody. Do those make any sense in the public's mind? Do you think that those rationales, can the government carry them forward in the face of an open letter from 6 journalism schools, a bunch of academics and researchers and journalists, and kind of how do we match those two things up? Do you think anyone want to jump in there?
Well, on the Bob Maclean piece, some people view him as an insufferable mosquito masquerading as a journalist, and I think partisans of all stripes have tried to put a stop to what they deem as needless and costly FOI practices for years. But does it make sense to punish all media outlets for the actions of one individual? I thought it was a bit rich for a progressive government to demonize one person and then charge everybody $25 to access basic government transparency and then call that equity. It's weird.
Jillian, what about the hypocrisy angle? The idea that for many, many years in opposition, and that this was a government that used the FOI Act. This was a party, the NDP, that has kind of like to carpet bomb all ministers and deputies and people with requests, get them back. They used it to dig up scandals like triple deletes, the health firings, money laundering, all sorts of things were fueled by the records that came back from FOI. And to now turn around and say, well, it's like almost like burning the bridge behind you. Like, well, don't do what we did. It's kind of a pain. Like, what do you make of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think that this can, become part of a broader narrative that, often is the case with majority governments, governments that get a little bit long in the tooth that are in office for longer, they start to seem arrogant. And I think that, for the government to say that the public doesn't need to worry about it because they're in power and it's not the Liberals anymore is very arrogant. No party is above public scrutiny, or should be. And I think that it will be a problem for them down the road.
Let's jump into the next topic here, which takes us back into the wonderful world of COVID. And this week, the announcement from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, there's going to be a federal vaccine passport if you want to get on a plane, train, or you want to travel internationally. We've been waiting for this, but immediately we heard from the BC government, well, we're not actually going to participate in that program right away. BC has a successful vaccine card that people are using, doesn't want to change it, seemingly, to participate in the one card to rule them all program that the federal government wants to do. Anyone have any thoughts on... I think people are going to have 2 cards in BC. Is that an issue? Is there a problem with explaining that to folks? Is this a federal provincial kind of war that we're caught in the middle of, or disgruntledness, or what do we think, Maclean?
It shouldn't be an issue, but it is. I went to the BC Lions game on Saturday, and I watched people struggling with their phones for not just their tickets, but their Vax cards. Watching this sort of unfold in real time, like, oh, I know I have it saved, but I'm not sure where. Is it in my files? Can you show me where it is on the files? This goes on and on and on. Asking people to manage 2 cards, which again, for everyone in this show right now, probably won't be a problem. But that's not who the issue is going to be for. It's going to be for, your uncle. It's going to be for your mom and your dad, that kind of thing. And the other thing is it's very difficult to understand why they can't be compatible. We're talking about barcodes. Why can't that be compatible? I don't understand. And if we have to have 2 cards, can't we just get rid of the old BC vaccine card and download the new one card to rule them all? Like, it just is. There's a lot of things that don't really make sense other than, a stubbornness and not wanting to do anything else kind of perspective.
Yeah, the Premier said that, BC was one of the first to do its own vaccine card, and it was looking for advice from Ottawa, and they were off basically in an election. And so we created our own card in BC, and now Ottawa has turned around. This is my view of it, not the Premier's words anymore. Ottawa's turned around after an election and tried to take the lazy way out here by putting a federal logo on top of all the different provinces' cards and say, congratulations, we have a federal vaccine passport, and some provinces don't want to do it. BC being one of the most notable ones. Katie, what do you think of this dynamic here between Trudeau and Horgan and on the cards?
This is eerily reminiscent of my time in Alberta, and I actually have a lot of empathy for the provincial government based on my prior experience, and I will tell you why. So when I was in Alberta in May 2020, we were the first province to roll out a COVID contact tracing app. And when the feds released their version, it became a constant and lengthy battle over whether or not Alberta would streamline the two or simply adopt the federal app instead. And I want to be clear, like the provincial app was superior in its capabilities, but my advice to the government would be it is not worth the headache. It is not worth the constant barrage of negative stories. Like, try and figure out how to streamline the two or just adopt the federal app instead. I understand where the government is coming from. They were the first to roll out the vax passports, and like arguably they have rolled out fairly seamlessly to date. I would say they're working well, but don't let that pride like prevent you from avoiding just a massive issues management issue.
Great point. What do you think, Jillian?
Yeah, I agree with Katie. I think this is on the federal government more than it is on the province, but the province might be the one that ends up being the target of people's frustrations. And I have heard from lots of people that they're confused and frustrated about this already before it even rolls out. But I do think that the provincial government deserves credit for getting vaccine passports in place and for leading on that. So I don't fault them for where they're at now.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as, I think BC is leaning really heavily on its Vax card right now. We hear Dr. Henry say again and again and again, that's the Vax card that is going to allow you to go to a Canucks game at full capacity. It's the vaccine card that will allow you to go to a full wedding. You need to show it. Their whole strategy is built around the vaccine card. 3.7 million people have downloaded it. I don't think British Columbia wants to change it and make everyone re-download it. They're happy with the success rate they have, and they're building their strategy around it. And it's not that BC doesn't have the data that Ottawa wants. Ottawa wants the batch number, like the vial number of every dose that you got. It wants the type of dose, the name, the date listed in this little thing. BC's got all that. You can get it right now if you want on your health gateway. It's just that the app only transmits your name and a little check mark or not. And so if you're going to give them a different passport, everyone has to re-download it. And I just kind of think BC seems like it just is unwilling to do it. It's just going to let people... It's provincial politics and concerns are more important than, the inconvenience of two passports is kind of my view of it. But I don't know. We will see. You're right, Katie. It's maybe you don't get into a fight with Ottawa if you can't win. It just sticks with you like gum on your shoe for months. And that's not, people just kind of end up being like, I don't want to have two passports. It doesn't make any sense. Why do I have to do this? One to get into a restaurant and one to get on a plane? Frustrating, but... Okay.
Fortunately, we know how superior government tech is, so I'm sure this will be resolved in no time.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. It's amazing we got 3.7 million people to download the card in the first place. You know, like get them to do it again. What do we think that number would go down to? Like 2-point-something million? Like you'd have a diminishing returns if you made them redo it. But anyways.
And also, you're right. Let's not pick a fight with Ottawa because it's not too difficult to imagine. That's a nice little childcare or transit funding program you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, although the Horgan government still seems like it's in a better majority position than the Trudeau government with a minority that needs to continue shoveling cash out for votes if it ever wants another election. But we have a premier and a prime minister you may never see in another election anyways. Let's move on to another COVID topic here, which is the first week of dual COVID briefings. This is a group of doctors who have assembled and called themselves Protect Our Province BC, who are launching their own competing public briefings on COVID-19. They contend BC's not providing enough candid science-based information to residents. So it's modeled after an Alberta group that came out and started doing its own briefings because they were unhappy there. Let's go around and talk about this. First to you, Rob. Oh, Rob. Oh, that's me. I will get to go first on this subject because I have a few things to say about it. That's good. I hate this idea, and I do not understand why. Well, I do understand, actually, why these doctors are doing it. This is a group, I think, that is fueled by the social media anger and frustration over Dr. Henry and the briefings. They have a support group of people who've been unhappy with the information from the beginning. Some of them are the COVID zero people who thought we should lock the province down from the beginning and have been unhappy with Dr. Henry ever since. That didn't work. COVID zero hasn't worked anywhere. No one really wants to admit that, but it didn't work in New Zealand or Australia. And I don't think the public is well served by 3 random people holding competing briefings without any inside data, without the CDC data, without the modeling data, without the epidemiology, without the vaccine data. This is and I don't want to dump on them personally, but the 3 people on the briefing here was a palliative care physician from Vancouver, an infectious disease physician and microbiologist, fair enough, and a family doctor. And I don't know what makes them qualified to hold a competing briefing to Dr. Henry. And I personally think it's a bad idea. Maybe it raises their public profile. Good for them. Get some more clicks. Doesn't do anything, in my mind. It confuses the public. There's a false equivalency being created here between Dr. Bonnie Henry and some doctors that you can get a 3rd, 4th, 7th opinion from. That's my rant on the subject. I'm glad that I called on myself first. Who wants to go in the wake of that? Anyone?
I do.
Okay. All right.
It's a race.
I'm going to disagree with Rob.
Cut her feed.
I'm just going to do a bit of a comparator. So in Alberta, these types of briefings were highly politically charged, and they were led by a physician who had donated a significant amount of money to the NDP in the past. The point was to attack the government's overall approach and the pandemic, and like sow fear, division, doubt, discontent. I think, true to form, the BC briefings, or the one that they've had so far, the approach is a little bit more thoughtful. It's a little bit more insightful, and I'm not aware of any obvious partisan ties. And these physicians are certainly not holding rallies like they were in Alberta. They certainly criticized BC officials for not providing enough data and information, but I would argue they have a point there. BC has continuously been wrapped for their poor data disclosure. Their overall transparency has not been equivalent to other jurisdictions. And so I see this as a positive accountability measure.
So BC doesn't provide enough data. Let's hold an hour-long technical briefing without that data, telling people why BC is wrong. I don't get it. How is the public served by 3 doctors who don't have enough data explaining to people that they don't have enough? I don't get it. I understand the concern that we don't provide enough data. I think it's totally legitimate. I agree with you. I just don't get... Like, you're John Q. Public and you're watching Dr. Henry, and then you turn on your YouTube channel and you see a palliative care doctor explain to you why she's wrong.
Right. Well, I guess I have faith in the people of British Columbia to discern between the various information that they're given.
Yeah, I don't think we should put people in a position in a public health emergency where 3 random doctors are pretending that they understand the situation better than our provincial health officer with 20 years experience in public health. But that's just me. I don't know. Maclean?
And luckily in BC, we can count on our media having free, unrestricted, and no charge access to all the information the government provides so that they can get the information eventually. I think Katy does have a point in that you shouldn't compare whatever's happening in BC to Alberta, because she's right. That was a nakedly political thing that was happening. It was essentially a third party working against the government for very clearly partisan purposes. I'm not sure that's the case here in BC. That said, I agree with you, Rob, in that it's not necessarily a good thing either. I would quibble when you say it's a competing briefing or it's a dual briefing. Are they though? It's just I think you're right when you say these are just 3 random people who are holding a press conference to say what they think, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean that they should be compared or, in any way held on remotely the same level as the briefings that Dr. Henry is giving. I'm fine with them doing it. I'm not fine with us treating them like it's a competing or dual briefing. It's not. It's just 3 people telling what they think.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Jillian?
Yeah, I think that it is concerning, because I think that when, there sort of was aspects to their messaging that would some people would take to mean that the government isn't trustworthy. But I think Katy's right that the government could have done a lot more to not let it get to this point where there is so much doubt in people's minds. And I think that it really underscores, to Maclean's point, why freedom of information is so important and trust in government is so important, because that's what really underlies vaccine hesitancy, underlies conspiracy theories. When people start to not trust the government for legitimate reasons, because the government has not been providing all the data that it could, because it's been slow to acknowledge things like aerosol transmission despite the evidence. I think that, they have to take a look at their process and recognize that it is important, because once you lose that trust, it's really hard to get back.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely born out of totally legitimate frustration. We've talked on the show before about the lack of data, the questions that go unanswered. It's totally legitimate. The whole point of their briefing was to talk about aerosol based transmission, which is totally legitimate. And the fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, BC focused on droplets instead of that. Yes. So did the rest of the world. BC was slow to adapt. Fine. But I don't understand why launching weekly briefings saying BC's wrong and just kind of criticizing it helps. It doesn't help the public. It just confuses them. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, the Physicians Association in BC saying, be careful. You are a doctor out there. There's thousands of doctors in BC. Be careful, because you speak with authority, and we need to speak with one voice here. And as people break ranks and start giving second and third opinions and backseat physicianing Dr. Henry, we lose confidence in the message. And
I agree with you. I would just say that I think that's been happening on a micro scale in places like Facebook since day one.
Yeah.
And this is just 3 people who are doing it with a TV camera, and we can just ignore them because there's dozens of things happening with probably even greater audiences that we're not even aware of, the 4 of us. And so, to me, the cynical response for me is that I don't think this is new. I think we're giving them too much attention, and that they're not competing or dual. They're not at that level.
Sure,
they shouldn't be.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the internet for you. Everyone is everyone is equal on the internet. But thank you for watching us on the internet this week, and thanks for tuning in and subscribing. Stick around. We got some more audio content for you on the podcast. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next week.